All right, boys and girls, we are live with the legend, Mr. Devin Townsend. This is Rob here from Rob's School of Music, and we're about to change the history of the world in this next hour, I think, and melt our faces right off our bodies.
I'm into it.
Awesome, dude. So we're a music school, and thanks to the world, the way the world is, we had to move everything online. So I started doing these weekly interviews back in April just to try and let the students know that, there's other musicians out there obviously going through similar circumstances. And one of the first questions I usually try and ask is a lot of our students are younger, not in age, but just in experience. And nerves plays a huge factor in performing back, when we could perform live. And do you have any tips for overcoming anxiety or stage fright when playing?
Well, I can safely assure you that it never goes away. I think it's an inevitable part of the process. And there's some people that actually feed on that. I've found some people find that the adrenaline that comes from that fear helps them. For me, it doesn't. For me, typically my thought patterns before playing a very nerve-wracking show is, why did I do this with my life? Like, why am I in front of other human beings? It makes no sense to me. But it's like that old adage where you have survived all the days of your life up to this point, specifically the ones that you didn't think you were going to survive. And live performance is very similar to that. You think that there's no way you can do it. You think there's no way that you're not going to be able to perform without screwing it up or whatever. But you do. You go out there and you do it. And also with the knowledge that sometimes it goes wrong. Sometimes you have a bad show. Sometimes you have all your worst fears are realized when you're on stage. But the real progress that I think that I've made as a performer and as a musician is getting over that. Like if you feel like you've humiliated yourself, just getting back up on your feet is almost the indicator that you're capable of some degree of success.
I like that. I like that very much. That's actually probably the realest answer that I've gotten to that question thus far. So that's definitely something that we can all learn from.
Anybody who tells you that they aren't nervous are either sociopathic or lying.
Yes, I agree with you. So what started your journey? Was there a record or a live show you saw or something that you're like, ooh, that's what I want to do?
I don't think it was. I don't think it was. The formulation of why I do this, I don't think happened in a particularly typical way. There's no one instance. There was a few little things. Like I remember being in grade school and there was a group of musicians that came to our elementary school. I was in grade 3 or 4 and they showed what an electric guitar did or what a bass did. And that piqued my interest. And after school, like the Monkees were on TV and that was kind of a thing, musical family, etc. But for me, I think I came from a family that was very loving, but emotionally, we kind of kept it to ourselves. Like overt displays of emotion, whether or not that was anger or really anything, were not frowned upon, but it was embarrassing for people. It's kind of the British way of being, I guess, and at least back then. And being somebody that has always been, since as far back as I can remember, highly sensitive and very intimately wired to perceive stimulus, that lack of an outlet for those emotional things was very difficult. And I found that there was one socially acceptable way of expressing myself, and that was through music, like through singing or through playing. So it became a loophole, and my all that sensitivity or whatever that I felt I needed to express came out through music, and people were uh, uh, encouraging of it rather than the shutting it down. And so everything kind of got hardwired to that, I guess. And I just am bullheaded, so I just kept doing it, kept doing it, kept doing it without any objective. There was no real sense of, oh, I'm going to be in a band or I'm going to play shows or whatever. I was actually going to go to university. I got a scholarship for music, but I decided to go wash dishes instead because I felt that I should pursue being in a band, and even that decision was not with any foresight. It was just happened. And then here I am. Now I'm 48 and I've got 30 records or something out now. And I'm as sort of shocked by it as anybody else.
Well, I mean, it's, from as I was trying to prep for this, I'm obviously a fan of yours, but I didn't realize how many records, how prolific. And I think as a musician and as someone who, is teaching music to other people, it's so inspiring that you sort of are able to exist outside of, well, it has to be this genre and it has to be this, and I have to sing this way. And to have that freedom, like, what is the creative process? How do you say this song's going to be this project, this song's going to be that?
Well, I guess it's the best way to start that answer is to say I was never, like a hip kid. I mean, I had buddies and everything, but I was, never part of the in crowd, so to speak. And so the benefit of that is that I never felt like there were parameters to what was acceptable or not. As a teen, I liked equally Metallica to Enya, and I liked Def Leppard as much as I liked Stravinsky, and I liked King's X as much as I liked New Age music and Kitaro and all these things, musicals, all the 70s musicals. And because I was never thrust into a position where my social, what's the word I'm looking for, where my social collateral was tied to what I did, it made it easy. It was great. There's people I know now that were, maybe they were the cool kids in school that are afraid to do anything else because it doesn't fit into what is acceptable. And that made it difficult for me as I got older because, of course, I love heavy music and I've done a lot of heavy music, but that's an extremely conservative genre, something that I didn't expect when I was a kid. It's the parameters for what is acceptable were things that I found very limiting from early on. And I remember whenever I had deviated from heavy music when I was younger, like releasing Ocean Machine at the same time as City, or Synkestra at the same time as Alien, or Deconstruction and Ghost, or whatever, there'd be a certain faction of the heavy metal community that were like, well, we don't think that this constitutes heavy metal. And I'm like, oh, thank God. In fact, if I don't have to fit into that genre, that's ideal. It doesn't mean that I won't do it, but my reasons for doing all these different styles, I guess, to answer your question in a roundabout way, is more because I'm compelled to do it and I'm not tied to any genre, right? I never was the flag bearer for prog or metal or or anything. And the creative process is actually really simple. When I first started, right from the beginning, there was humor in it, and there was mellow stuff and heavy stuff and pop stuff and death metal, and people were confused. And I remember in the beginning, people thinking it was indicative of some sort of mental illness. They're like, clearly, you have to be unbalanced in order to represent all these different things. But conversely, I think the opposite is true. I think that if somebody does one thing to the exclusion of everything else, that is representative of an imbalance to me. It's the equivalent of someone saying, for every meal, I'm going to eat steak.
Yeah.
For breakfast, I'll have a steak, and lunch, I'll have steak, and a snack, I'll have meat. And then, sometimes after a while, you're like, God, I'd do anything for some granola and a salad. And music's the same. So I'll do one thing, and then once I'm done with it, I usually invest so much time and effort into the creation of it that when it's finished, I'm sick of it. And so what I do next is often the opposite, not because of any reason other than, man, I'm done with that. Holy cow, that took up way too much real estate in my head, right?
Yeah, I think that is, something we pride ourselves on here at this school is if someone comes in and they say they want to play Metallica, I say, okay, but we're going to learn jazz too. If they want to play pop, okay, well, we're going to learn funk. Like I try and keep everyone well rounded because exactly that. Why limit yourself to just one thing? There's lots of colors in the rainbow. Why not exploit all of them?
However, I would also throw this into the pot that I don't know if it's necessary. You know what I mean? Like I guess it depends on what your objective is. And I'm not talking about the school. I'm not talking about you. I'm just talking about me. I I've had enough success to have a cool little studio here, and married and kids and all these sorts of things, and I make a living and all that. But you look at a band like AC/DC, who have been doing in one way or another the same record for 50 years,
Yeah.
and they are one of the most successful musical enterprises of all times. So I guess if your intention is to make money, I would maybe suggest not listening to me.
No, man, I think you're spot on because I think exactly the analogy with eating the same thing every day that would get very,
It'd make
very
me
old.
crazy.
Yeah.
And I'd be so weirded out by somebody that was just like, "What? You're gonna eat fish?" But dude, you've just had steak for the past 6 months. Yeah, well, that's what I do. My trip is invested in. I'm the steak guy. I don't know,
I
man.
I think that's perfect.
Yeah, make
Um,
a wide berth.
when it comes to you have an amazing signature guitar. You have the pickups. When you're part of that process, like what are the steps involved in that, or is it literally here's a demo one, oh no, change the wood, oh no, change this. You have that Evertune bridge, which I can't understand, but cool stuff going on there. What's that process like?
First off, I'm stuck on this thought. Why don't you understand the Evertune?
I don't. I watched a video of you explaining it, and I still don't because in the video you're saying that you use like not incredibly heavy strings, but even with a lower tuning, it's still okay, and that I don't understand how that works.
Basically, sorry, I got this horrible cold. It's not horrible. It's just cold. It's the way that pitch is established on a guitar string is tension, right?
Right.
And there's a series of springs in the body that is connected to the Evertune bridge that with an Allen key, once you get it in tune, you basically lock it so that tension on that spring is locked in. So if you bend it, the spring goes like this, and then when you let it go, it goes back like this. If the neck warps, if the wood changes it with humidity, and then the spring might go like this. But because it's locked in, that spring maintains the tension on the string, and the result is ultimately your guitar. You never have to tune it. It's like, but you can still bend it because of the function of it is past a certain threshold of tension. Then that the tension is no longer maintained, right? It has to be within a sort of window of that tension on the spring for it to function. And if past that, then you can tune it sharp. And if it's below that, then you can tune it flat, right? So you keep it in the middle there, and it makes it work. And like this, it's like I never tune this thing, but I can still bend, and I can do all this stuff, but it's just the end result is with just a modicum of a learning curve. This huge psychological barrier for recording for me has been alleviated. Mainly, if I have an idea, I can pick up my guitar and record it and know that if the idea is of value somewhere else down the line, I can still use it. Have you ever been in the situation where you record something quickly because you've got an idea, but you didn't spend the time tuning the guitar properly?
Yes.
And then when you try and integrate it into a session, you're like, oh, that had this great feel and everything, but it's out of tune, and this alleviates that. And I was working with a producer recently, and he had never heard of it, and he was confused by it. And but when he finally put it in action to record, and you do an entire session, 3 or 4 days without tuning your guitar, and they're all dead in tune. He had all his guitars retrofitted in it with it. And I guess the reason why I wanted to explain that is because it plays into the other part of your question as to the process of designing signature equipment. There's two modes of thought with it. One is someone pays you money. So you endorse some crappy guitar because someone's giving you enough money to rationalize that in your mind, right? And then you go home and play your Les Paul or whatever, right? But ladies and gentlemen, I thoroughly endorse the Court $300 guitar or whatever. And then the other side of it is where I like to think I lie, in that my process relies on me being efficient, because if it isn't, I get lost in the thoughts, right? Like I have a real tendency to think quickly when I'm writing. And so I keep my studio really clean. I keep it ergonomic. I keep everything within arm's reach. My guitar's always in tune. And all those things play into my ability to move quickly. And the design of the equipment is exactly the same process. With this guitar, I think, okay, for example, I love the sound of a Les Paul Custom with mahogany body, maple neck, 24 3/4 inch scale, got the pitch of the headstock that all these things about that accumulate into a sound that I can rely on for one of the three guitar sounds that I record with: a heavy sound, a dirty sound, a clean sound. And so the problem with the Les Paul for me is I don't like sitting with it. It feels weird for me. Little things like when I put it on the ground, which I will always do if I'm moving quickly, I put the guitar flat on the ground. The pitch of the headstock is such that the joint between the body and the neck is off the ground. And I snapped 2 guitars in my life by accidentally stepping on it. So with this, it's like, okay, how do I get that sound? But how do we avoid those things? So, I made it that the pitch of the headstock was such that it had the sound, yet the body was thick enough that when I lie it on the ground, there's like 2 millimeters of clearance with the headstock. The pickups, I know that I like EMG 81 for a certain sound, but I know that I like a low gain single coil for a clean sound. However, I don't like being out of tune when I'm on tour. I don't want to put an Evertune into an old Fender. So the Fishman, I chose to do that product with them because they said, we can give you 2 distinct sounds in one pickup. And so I went to Boston and I worked on it. I drive people crazy with my obsessive nature when it comes to these things. Like the famous guitar, it took us 10 modifications to get it right. But when it's right, because there is a goal in mind, now it works. It's perfect. It's perfect for me. When I want to record a certain guitar sound, that guitar is exactly what I need. I don't want to play a Les Paul. I don't want to play a Jackson or anything. I want to play that. And so my design process with anything that I work with is it needs to fill a niche that currently no product exists in for me.
Cool. Very cool. It's funny you say that in terms of people will push things that they're not really a fan of. I've been working with PRS guitars since 2008 or so, and those are the guitars I actually play, and those are the guitars at the school for people to use, and I feel so prideful to have something that I love to work with. You definitely flip through your Guitar Player, Guitar World magazine, and you can certainly see musicians hawking something that you have to think for a second. Is that really what they're using? So,
yeah, and I mean, but at the same time, I guess everybody's got to eat, right?
100%. I did. Hey, no shame in the game, but it's definitely
go.
we're hip to it. Um, let's talk about your voice for a second. Your voice, the range and the power. In these interviews, I've spoken to many guitar players because I'm a guitar player by trade, a handful of drummers, but very few people that sing with the power that you do, what sort of routine do you like? Say it's show day. Like, is it tea? Is it the sleep? Are you steaming?
Well, I should be. um, Singing is a conundrum for me because I never really wanted to be a singer. I always sang, but I remember distinctly when I was first learning guitar, uh, having a bit of a 12-year-old existential crisis about, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to be a singer or do you want to be a guitar player? And at that time, I had decided I would be a guitar player and I would find a singer. But the psychology that comes with any instrument, like if you're a drummer or a bassist or a guitar player or a singer, just based solely on the function of how you present that information to an audience, it changes the way you think about music. And to explain that further, as a singer, a lot of times what you're presenting people is your trip, your lyrics, your hang-ups, your loves, your feelings, and it's your voice. It's the same voice that you hear when you're at the bank or what have you. And there's a psychology that ends up evolving from that I was unprepared for. Because every time I auditioned singers, when I decided I wasn't going to be one, I was like, oh, this guy's such a pain in the ass, right? It's like the drama and and all this sort of stuff was just, I was like, oh God. And so I said, okay, well, until I find somebody that doesn't drive me bananas, I'll just sing. And I just never found anybody that didn't drive me bananas. And then I got a gig with Steve Vai in 1991. And then all of a sudden he was like, oh, you're my singer. And I was like, yeah, but I'm not a singer, man. I'm a songwriter, or I'm a guitar player. And so I had to learn how to sing after I was already a singer. I never warmed up. They're like, don't eat tomatoes. I'm just eating loads of tomatoes. Don't eat cheese, eating loads of cheese. Like everything that I wasn't supposed to do, I was doing. And then after a while, I just lose my voice while I'm on tour. And then that sucks, man. That is, you want to talk about compounding the fear of going on stage. Add to that fear the fact that your voice is gone. And, call me tomorrow and see how you feel. And so slowly, and I had some experiences with some musicians in the mid 90s who were very seasoned. They were in popular bands and really had to be on their A game. And they were like, oh, you need to learn how to do vocal warm-ups. And so maybe in about 95, I started, no, maybe a little later, 98, maybe I started doing vocal warm-ups. And it's a series of scales and arpeggios and sort of larynx warm-ups, like making bubbly noises and humming noises. And then, drinking booze on tour is the worst for a singer. But what is sometimes even worse is having to go to bed when you've had a long week and everybody else is raging. So it's a fine line. And so, yes, I do have techniques that I practice to try and maintain it. But I think some of the power, if we're going to choose that word, that comes along with my voice has a lot more to do with force of will than any technique at all. I think I resented singing so much that when I had to do it, I just would blast. You know what I mean? I was like, I don't want to do this, so let's just get it over with. And then I just scream. And then the last thing I'll say about this is I'm fortunate to have had, you probably don't want swearing on this, right?
It's a rock school, man. It's allowed.
Right. I was fortunate to have so many shitty jobs prior to doing this. And, I did a ton of things. And one of the many things I did was work in a ton of restaurants. And I was a dish pig and I prepped the food and I cut it up and put it in buckets. And I had to go into the walk-in cooler and organize these things. But in the walk-in cooler, no one could hear you. So while I was organizing by date all these buckets of chicken and steak and whatever, I would just scream in there. because at the time I really liked Jane's Addiction or Faith No More, Soundgarden, Pantera, and so I just started screaming in the walk-in cooler, and it was the best way for me to learn how to sing like that because it wasn't embarrassing. I knew no one could hear me, and that was the way that I did it. And now I'll tour with bands because my voice is really inconsistent on tour. Sometimes I'm good, sometimes I'm not. But I'll tour with bands that are like they're professional singers, and they gargle with lavender and go to bed at 7:30 and always smell like nice soap or whatever. And I'm often really I feel like a Neanderthal around them because they can keep their voice for the entirety of the tour, and they're always in pitch and all this stuff. And dude, that's not the way it is for me. I just feel like I scream until I taste blood, and then I hope it stays. Right?
I mean, it's real, but my girlfriend is a singer. We make music together for like 8 years now, and the first thing that I turned her onto was the Addicted record, and she loved your voice and loved the stuff with Annika and all that stuff. It's beautiful. And then I started going deeper into the catalog and showing all these different colors to your voice, and it's just so mind-boggling that so many different things, from something almost frightening to beautiful, comes out of one person. So it's very cool.
Well, I appreciate the compliment. That's very flattering, actually. And I will also say to this, similar to the original question that we had in this interview, I don't know anybody that doesn't contain all those emotions. I don't know anybody that doesn't contain frightening and beautiful. Mm-hmm. And if I do, again, I often think they're either sociopathic or they're lying to me. It's like, so my explanation of the ability to do that comes down to, well, I'm a human being, I'm insecure, and I'm arrogant, and I'm judgmental. I'm like all those things that I wish I wasn't. I really wish I wasn't, man. It would be great to pretend I was some sort of enlightened cat, but I'm not, man. I'm like a mess, like everybody else. And so my voice, I just think, okay, well, I feel like this, so this is the tool that I have. It's like hammering nails with a baseball bat. That's how I kind of feel about my voice. I'm like, well, this needs to be delicate. We'll figure out how to be delicate.
You execute it masterfully. So definitely
Thanks,
cool.
Man. I appreciate it.
100%. What's your perspective on music theory in terms of applying it to, say, writing?
I think it's two things. I think one, it can be incredibly helpful. I've had to learn over the past 3 years how to orchestrate, because I'm working on like a symphonic projects and this musical and all this. And so I had a teacher over the course of the past couple of years say, okay, this is what a piano is. This is where the viola's voice exists. This is where the first violin, this is where the second violin, this is where the cello, this is where the double bass, this is where the piccolo, this is where the flute, this is where the woodwinds. It's like, and the range in which that functions, and the intervals that you choose and how they line up and how the tonality of it, it's like, it was so frustrating at first because I didn't know theory. I mean, I knew high school theory. I played tuba all through high school just because it was obnoxious, right? Not because I wanted to be a tuba player. It was funny, right? And so I knew enough about sharps and flats and rests and circle of fifths and all these things to pass elementary school music theory, but I never applied that to anything that I did. In fact, I started playing in open C tuning at such an early stage that when I went to jam with people and they say, oh, it's in A, I was like, oh, I don't know where A is or anything. So I have functioned up to the last 4 years with completely rudimentary music knowledge. But by learning and going to school essentially for orchestration, I put this keyboard here and I've labeled all the keys, right? So it's A, B, C, D, and I've got a blue circle on every C. And so it's like I started from the beginning, and then I started learning about which intervals and how that interacts with each other, and how the vibratory qualities of this instrument, maybe make a seventh sound really messed up. And the downside of that is oftentimes you can second guess your intuition with too much theory. You end up, and this is the best example of this for me. I work with choirs often. And on Empath, the last record I did, I had this absolutely monstrously wonderful choir, the Electro Women's Choir, based out of Vancouver. And we had agreed that they would participate in the record. And I had to work with an orchestrator. And I had to say, listen, here's my MIDI. Here's all my voices doing the parts. This is what I want the choir to sing. What I would appreciate is if you take this, deconstruct the session, and then score it, because I can't write those notes, but this is what I want it to sound like. And I went over to his place one night and he said, there's this one part here that doesn't musically make sense. And I was like, yeah, but it's right. And he goes, yeah, but it doesn't make sense. And I was like, yeah, but dude, it's right. He says, okay, but listen, if that voice here is doing that, then that note there is dissonant with that voice. I'm like, yeah, and that creates the effect that we're looking for. And it took me a while for that explanation to make sense for him. And what had to happen is I had to say, listen, just do it. And he was finally like, oh, wow, that really works. I was like, no shit. And it was the reason why it worked is because my objective was not to be musically accurate, but to follow an impression that I was hoping that the music would give to the listener. And that impression was claustrophobic. It goes like this. It's a crescendo, it's a crescendo, it's a crescendo. By the end, it turns to chaos and then resolves. And the chaos was important for me, that those particular dissonant notes crested at that particular time. And he was actually very interesting after that. He was like, I stand corrected on that. I didn't recognize, and I think he had even said in regards to his own theoretical knowledge, that stepping outside of those boundaries can have really practical uses. So it's two things. It's good to know so you can communicate with people, but it also can be an impediment if you view music as a stagnant right and wrong kind of thing, right?
Yeah, 1,000%. I couldn't agree more. One of my favorite lessons we have a bunch of teachers who work for me, but one of the lessons I pride myself on is the one where I tell everyone that there aren't any wrong notes. And that kind of blows everyone's mind. But if you put the wrong note in the right place, or put the two right notes next to that wrong note and get out of there before it's two, you can make that note work. And I think that's so liberating once you get outside of those parameters of, again, right and wrong. There's a lot of gray in the middle there, I think.
That's why I like echo. Because if you make a really wrong note with echo on it, it sounds intentional.
Yeah. Yes. All right. So let's see, which direction do we want to go? Let's do, has anything ever gone super wrong? And I'm sure as a musician that happens, but something that was like, that stands out, or something like really crazy that happened at a gig.
Well, I mean, there's always,
right?
Always. I mean, I can't think of an experience that I've had that has resulted in any excitement or progress that doesn't include failure. And a question that often gets asked of me is, do you have any advice for musicians just starting out, or musicians looking to break in, or whatever, however the question's phrased? But ultimately, do you have any advice for younger or more inexperienced musicians? And my answer is always the same, and that is, you need to learn how to fail efficiently. Because the people who I know who are fantastic improvisers are the ones that don't fear playing the wrong note. And the ones that are terrified to jam are often the ones that have had a lot of success, in my experience at least. And to explain that further, it's almost like they never had the chance of fucking up so much that people thought they were idiots, or that publicly they never did something that everybody was like, dude, that guy sucks, man. Did you hear that performance that's on YouTube of, I remember years ago, like you got the song Kingdom that I've been playing for years, and it's not the hardest one I've got to sing, but it sucks to sing because it's high and lots of vibrato and whatever. And we did this festival in France. It's like 80,000 people. And the one song they chose was Kingdom. And I shit the bed so hard on it, man. It just sounds like I had my balls stuck in a taffy puller. And it's like the whole thing was just, it's like, and it's on the front page. And I'm like, bah! And I remember thinking, there's all these people that see maybe some of the stuff I do online, like there's the EMG version and there's all these other versions of Kingdom that are like pretty good, but those are not the same situation. It's not like you had no sleep and it was dusty and you're nervous and everything. It's like, no, they fed you and then they give you 3 takes and then you get to do it right and mix it yourself, right? And this wasn't that. And I remember thinking after that, it's like, oh God, how can I ever live this down? No one's ever going to give me an opportunity like that again because I sucked so hard. But that becomes this weird trap as well. It's like we get so used to residing in our insecurity and in our self-pity and in our pain and anger and judgmental nature that in absence of it, it's like our identity goes away and we're super uncomfortable with it. So it becomes this devil that we know to sit there after you've screwed something up and be like, oh, I suck. Oh, I suck. Oh, I can't believe I did that. Oh, I suck. I suck. As opposed to, yeah, dude, it sucked for sure. But next. And if you can learn to do that, there's a huge amount of growth that comes from that. Huge amount. In fact, a lot of the people that I continue to work with, because I've worked with so many musicians, and a lot of them go by the wayside for a number of reasons. It's not just this, either personality or just outgrow each other or whatever. But the people that I stick with typically are the ones that have fucked up colossally, but keep going, like recognize that was a mistake, either apologize for it or figure out a way for it not to happen again and just try again. No one who's achieved any level of success hasn't done that. And I think a lot of times we're so afraid of looking like an idiot, specifically with the internet and all this stuff now, that people are terrified to fail. But if you can learn to do it, that's the biggest piece of advice I can give you.
I like that a lot. I like that very much. One of the stories that I kind of tell people, because a lot of the students know, the school is Rob's School of Music, and I'm Rob, so it's kind of built into the title, But my musical career had many ups and downs. My family owned a restaurant 10 years ago that didn't work because of failure is definitely part of the process. So that's tremendous advice.
Well, I think it's also good to not define yourself by that failure. Mm-hmm. It's if you did something that maybe you did something that you feel is irreparable, like just you hurt somebody in a way that you feel is unforgivable. I think that learning how to forgive yourself is another thing that sort of falls under the same umbrella, because no one else is going to do it. It's like some people will take them down. They've done something. That's it for their life. They just live in that failure for eternity, and it defines them. It's like what Ace Ventura, laces out, like that whole thing. I think that's another trap to be avoided. No one cares. And if they do, they only care for a week, just long enough to make you feel like shit. And then they move on to something else. Right. And then you come back and they forget. Like, oh, hey, it's good to see you again. You're like, oh man, I thought I could never show my face after that performance. They're just like, what? Oh, right. Oh gosh, you think we've been thinking about that? God, we stopped thinking about that 2 days after it was done,
That's very, very true. You talked about you got to mix it. Production, your production is fantastic. What software are you using? Is it Pro Tools, Logic, Ableton?
Yes, all three. Yeah, I use Pro Tools as my main DAW for mixing and tracking. I use Logic for orchestral work and uh, just kind of musical loop-based things. And I use Ableton. I got the Push, and I really think that's a cool unit. And I sort of go between. So the home base is always Pro Tools, but I do submixes. So I'll export my current work to 0. Then I have a folder in that songs folder that says Pro Tools, Ableton, Logic, or what have you. And in each one of those is mixes for Logic, mixes for Ableton. And then I make a session under each one of those folders that is the same tempo that I just keep replacing that submix in. And then if I, for example, want to do MIDI-based orchestral work with the Spitfire libraries or the Cinesamples libraries or any of those things, Logic is just a much more efficient platform for me for that. Like the MIDI implementation is really cool, and I really love the retroactive record function. I like that you can modify your keystrokes to your own work. And having that compartmentalized, so when I'm in Logic, I'm like, this is what I do in Logic. I don't track vocals in Logic. I don't track guitars in Logic. I do symphonic stuff, and I do loop-based stuff in this. And then when it comes to just making alien freakout sounds, which I like doing, I use Ableton because, dude, Ableton's bananas, right? I just have the session and I bring it in and I've got Push set up and I just push right here and then I just press play and I go, wee, and then I bring it, move it back into Pro Tools and then start to refine it so it makes more sense.
It's funny how you say that with Push. I was a Pro Tools guy forever, and then about 4 years ago got into Logic. I use that as my main for everything, but I won't record vocals into it. I still like the editing, just vocals into Pro Tools better. But during the quarantine and this whole 8-month saga, I picked up the Push in Ableton, and it's a whole nother world of coolness.
So much fun, man.
Yeah,
so much fun. It's a big learning curve, and I mean, I find that I know Ableton the least of them all. At one time, I was actually much better at Ableton than I am now, but I find that at least back when I started using it at 3, like Live 3, and the sound quality was really weird. It was like kind of cheap sounding in a weird way, the way that it processed it. And so I stepped away from it for a while and only use it for having fun. And that's basically what it remains as for me. And Logic is, I mean, I love Logic. I think Logic X is an incredible program, but there's a bunch of stuff about it that really frustrates me too. There's a bunch of the editing functions that, and it's not that they're bad at all. It's just my muscle memory. I can rage in Pro Tools, man. I'm so fast at it that when I'm in Logic, even though I'm getting better at it, and I'm constantly surprised at how cool it is and the new things that and the price is awesome. Mm-hmm. But I'll be working and I'm like, oh, I can't think fast enough. I'm having to like, there's no muscle memory here. I'm having to like, oh God, okay, how do I do that again? Shit, what's the, you know what I mean? Whereas with Pro Tools, I can just be like, bang, 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 you know?
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
From my experiences as well. When it comes to recording your guitars, is it using an Axe Effects? Are you miking up amps? What is that process?
Well, I like the experimentation, although it can be very frustrating because it's a waste of time at some point. But I'd say a little of everything, but primarily Axe Effects 3. So I've got the Kemper, I've got the Helix, I've got Axe Effects 3, Axe Effects 2. I've got the Torpedo that if I need to use an amp. I've got a couple of old amps. I've got this old 1950s Fender Champ that's really nice. But I work so closely with Matt Picone and the Fractal crew that everything that you've heard on any record of mine since 2009 has been Axe Effects. There's been one or two overdubs that I might beef something up with an impulse response that I got from a buddy for the Kemper, but it's got a different low end and I don't dig it. And I use the Helix. Actually, I use the Helix a lot, a ton actually, but not for guitar sounds. It's really a musical unit that has interesting, strange ways of making loops for me. But I don't like the sound of it nearly as much for like a Fender or a Mesa or a Marshall. And on Ampath, I rented a studio and spent 3 days with. I brought in 12 cabs, vintage cabs, new cabs. I had 12 different heads. I had all these boutique things. We had Soldanos and Bogners and Mesas and modified Marshalls and EVH, just everything, because I was convinced that the sounds that I wanted to get, I was convinced that I was like phoning it in with the Fractal. I was like, there's clearly it can be better. So I went to the best studio in town, big SSL board. We spent all like the first day and a half just finding the opportune points for the microphones, like to the best of my ability. I got 12 of the best amps and cabs set up as I could. And we recorded these sounds. And I said, let's record a DI as well, just to be careful. And this is what I found from it, is that the music that I write is so dense that big sound that I got with the analog amp, by the time I fit it into the mix, I had to do high and low pass so much that all that was left was this unmusical mid-range. So I reamped it all through the Axe effects after all of that. But I did it a little different in that I went to a kind of famous producer's place with the Axe effects, and I said, let's run the Axe effects into a power amp, into a vintage cab. Let's make an IR of just the cab, but use the preamp in the Axe effects for our sound source. So as opposed to trying to replicate an amplifier, the preamp is the Axe effects. Wow. And we just mic'd up this cab and got the most kick-ass sound that we could using the Axe effects as a preamp, made an IR of it that now I use for everything. And honestly, the Axe effects sounds so much better than any amp that I use.
Yeah,
but
sorry, I cut you off. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, someone told me the other day, they say, oh, you always are, in the midst of some sort of existential thing. And, they said you should, I've never gone through that, and as a result, I'm happy. And I was thinking, yeah, but I don't want that happiness. The happiness that I want is a result of having found out for myself. And that's how I did the amplifier thing. Now I'm fine with the Axe effects, but prior to going through that experience, I was convinced I was missing out on something.
I agree. I can't even, it's so crazy some of the things you're saying, because it's like in my own head. Over the course of all the different guitar players I've gotten to talk to throughout this, that's one of the constant internal dilemmas of, well, yeah, modeling can do this, this, and that, but it's not a real amp, And I was in that headspace for so long, and I tried the Helix, I tried a Kemper, and then I got the Axe FX 3.
Yeah.
And I run it through a powered Friedman cabinet, and it is the best sounding amplifier I've played in my life.
That's sick.
Any sound I want, it feels like an amp. The way it responds to your play.
Totally. Yeah, and it's. I'm really glad to have had that experience as well, because it's Luke Skywalker going back into the forest, and Yoda's just like, hey, you're not gonna dig what you find. And you're like, but I need to know. That's how I felt about amps versus Axe effects, and I ended up spending like $3,000 just to realize that I already had what I was looking for.
Well, thank you for doing that work for all of us, because now we know.
I doubt that anybody will take my word for it, but take my word for it.
I believe it. So my two closing things. One is like a rapid fire series of questions, and the other one we'll start with, if you had to assemble a super group of other musicians, living or dead, you can play with them or not, it doesn't matter. 5 other guys, 4 other guys or girls. Who would you pick?
My first thought is no one, but that's just because I find most of the time the social implications of being with people to be really trying.
Yeah, remove any bullshit just on talent alone. You don't have to talk to him.
Hmm. Gosh, I don't know, man. I got to play with most of the people that I really wanted to play with.
That's cool.
I uh, I would always choose my friends, I think.
Yeah.
You know, I've got one or two friends in bands. I mean, I've toured for years, but I've only got like one or two people that are like friends. After all that touring, there's only like one or two people. So I would choose them,
Cool.
but uh yeah, man. Sorry, this is a question that you've just stumped me with.
That's okay. I mean that the initial answer was kind of an answer in itself. So
Mm.
it's a complicated question. I that question. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say most of the time when people talk about supergroups, they assume that you get a bunch of people who have had a vision together
Right.
and they think it's going to work. Like, oh, we'll get John Bonham and Jimi Hendrix, and but at the end of the day, a lot of the reason why these bands existed in the form that they did is there was some sort of unspoken hierarchy between these people in
Mm-hmm.
that they filled in peaks and valleys in each other's personalities that created something. So I've gotten offered on a number of occasions from other musicians in my field or peers or whatever, well, we should do this quote unquote super group, which is ultimately just this lower mid tier jerk off fest, right? But I think to myself, yeah, but we all do our own projects. What are we going to say to each other? We're either going to be so polite with each other that we're going to have a bunch of mediocre material, or we're going to kill each other. You know, like the reason why I can function the way that I do is because I have control over it.
Mm-hmm.
And in any situation that I've been in where we jam and create wonderful things as a result of me being part of a collective, it's because we're buddies.
Right.
You know, and I find that I've been able to have jams, brilliant to me, musical jams with people who are my friends and not the best musicians in the world. And those jams are infinitely better than me trying to jam with established musicians because everybody's kind of got this thing. Everybody's either got their nose out of joint or they don't want to jam or somebody's afraid to say something and talk over the other person. And so that's the reason why it's a complicated question for me. I think it would, my roundabout answer is I would play bass in a really simple band with a bunch of people that didn't have drama.
Yeah. I dig it. I totally dig it. I've had many of falling outs over people for various ego things, and currently the project that I'm doing is in a similar vein where there isn't any struggle. So it definitely
Mm-hmm.
makes sense to me.
Well, and I know that I'm a liability too. Yeah, there's people that I like to think, oh, I don't want any drama, but dude, man, I'm a hard guy to be in the band with, you know. So I think to myself, well, I wouldn't really want to be in a band with me. You know, I'm a pain in the ass.
I dig it, man. I do. All right. Well, then this last part, my closing thing, is a series of rapid fire questions, this or that, all gear and music related.
Sure.
Um, when I was asking these questions, about a month or so ago, I always had to preface it that it was going to be nothing political or in that vein because when a series of questions, everyone would kind of chap up a bit. But no, gear, music,
Okay,
fun.
sure. Yeah, yeah.
All right. So, humbucker or single coil?
Single coil.
Nice. All right. Uh, Les Paul or Strat?
Strat.
Strat or Telly?
Telly.
Les Paul or SG?
Les Paul.
P bass or jazz bass?
P bass.
Cool. Martin or Taylor acoustic?
Martin.
Fender or Marshall amplifier?
Fender.
Wow, you're great at these. Just let them go. Cool. All right. Effects. Delay or reverb?
Delay.
Fuzz or overdrive?
Overdrive.
Phaser or chorus?
Phaser.
That's the only one that's the definitive right answer. So we're good. Beatles or Stones?
Beatles.
John or Paul?
Paul.
Okay, that's also I agree there. Zeppelin or Floyd?
Oh, that's a rough one. At one time, it would have been unequivocally Zeppelin, but now I think it's Floyd.
Okay, cool. So then, if it were to be Floyd, would it be Dark Side or The Wall?
The Wall.
I'm a Wall guy too. Awesome. Um, the rest of them aren't super heavy. Pearl Jam or Nirvana?
Oh, I like them both. Uh, Probably Nirvana though.
Okay, and then the rest are the last one. It's you ever see the movie Airheads?
I maybe is that the one with Brendan Fraser?
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
vaguely remember it. Yeah, that's like
Okay.
the one that's so hard to watch now because it's so 90s.
Yes, so
Yeah,
90s.
yeah.
That's honestly that's how I got turned on to PRS guitars was that movie because that's what he
Oh yeah.
requests. Yeah, but there's a line in the movie where they're asking him and the cop says to him, "Lemmy or God," and then it's Lemmy is God. But if
Let me use God. Yeah,
yeah,
I
but no,
don't know about that.
yeah, no one seems to get. I really like honestly, I'm deleting that question right now from the list because it just doesn't land very well.
What Lemmy or God?
Yeah.
Oh God, for sure. Oh my God, kidding me? Like, you know what I mean? Like I would, I saw the Lemmy thing where he's talking about having a tryst with a woman with his son, and I remember thinking like, oh,
Some lines shouldn't be crossed.
yeah. When you think about whatever your concept of God is, if it's a man with a beard, or if it's just the overarching energy that is everything, which is how I would certainly perceive it.
Right.
Uh, yeah, man, Lemmy can have uh, he can have his tryst with his son for as long as he wants. That being said, Motorhead is one of my favorite bands ever. So,
Yeah, they are fantastic, man.
oh
It's
my god,
it's it's funny how like when you take the person out of the equation or the equation out of the person, like music is music, and I think that's like my main point in doing these. And thank you so much for your time.
you're so
Um,
welcome.
it's a crazy time of the year and the world and such, but it's
I've got
just hmm?
I've got friends. I've got a ton of friends that worked with Motorhead. I've got a ton of friends that toured with Motorhead. The tour manager that I worked with did Motorhead for years. The sound man I worked with did Motorhead. The guitar tech, friends of mine band did all these tours with Motorhead, and everybody says, without a word of a lie, that Lemmy is every bit as badass and as good a dude as people claim him to be. And I think that I did a couple of festivals with them, but I never talked to him. But knowing the crew and everything, sometimes you can tell a lot about a band by talking to the crew. Like when the conversation of their employer comes up, they either shut down or they start looking at their shoes, and you're like, oh, he's one of those. But with them, everybody was super super protective of him in a way that made me feel that they all were like, I'd do anything for this guy. And I think the reason why they felt that way is because there was zero bullshit with him. He was just who he was, with all the ups and downs, like at every minute of the day. And I think any one of us, that's an awesome thing to strive for. We can only hope to get to that point. But at the same time, maybe you'd have to be banging people with him, which would be heavy.
Yeah. Yeah. I draw the line, and my lines are pretty transparent, but that's one I may draw.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm joking. Obviously, I don't know anything about it, but no, I hear that he was one of the greatest people ever, and I'm glad because now when I listen to it, I'm like, yeah, he's still awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome, dude. Well, that's our time, and I just thank you so much for the music and being inspiring and just your humor. I didn't even get into that, man. You're a funny guy, and that's so cool when music it's not always black jackets and sunglasses and
It's a defense mechanism, though. I'm reasonably confident that that's what it is, but I appreciate it nonetheless.
well, I think you're awesome. So
Thanks, man. You too, buddy. And good luck with the school. And I think it's really cool what you're doing. And to anybody watching this, good luck and give Rob a high five. And I'll see you guys around.
Awesome, brother. Thank you so much. Stay safe. Enjoy the rest of the year, and hopefully good things are to come.
You're welcome, buddy. Have a good
All
one.
right. You too. Be well.
Bye bye. Yeah.